Hi, everybody. It's Renee Cormier from the Fractional Referral Network. Today, I have Keith Boswell with me. We're talking about blind spots in the boardroom, how bad data effectively blindsides a business. So, Keith is a 29-year entrepreneur of digital marketing strategy, and he currently operates as a fractional chief digital officer and marketer for startups and enterprises. And his website is Perceptant,
Perceptant. Always fun when
Perceptant.com.
you make up your own word. Yeah,
Yes. All right, Keith, welcome.
absolutely.
Um,
Thanks for having me, Renee.
yeah. Tell us, Keith, what are some of the common signs that a business is operating with flawed data? Because this is really all about data. Yeah.
Yep. I'll give you two practical examples because being in digital, we have direct feedback data often in real time from most of the sources. So, small business, potentially fatal bad data issue. We were contacted in August by a small specialty healthcare clinic, and they'd been clipping along for the last 5 years, getting 20 conversions a month, which filled their pipeline, kept them profitable. And suddenly in June, um, traffic to the site started plummeting. Conversions went to near zero, and the business was in tailspin. And the the digital vendor that was in place could not explain what was happening. They were still spending on Google. They were supposedly doing SEO on the site. So we came in to perform an audit to see, is the business favorable right now? Because they literally had about 3 months of runway left. And as we got in and started looking at things, we quickly identified that they'd fallen like, I don't know, 50 places in Google. They'd held a steady #1 organic ranking for about 8 years in the top 10 for their specialty. Suddenly that was gone. They were not seeing any organic leads at all. And again, like I said, trickling in from paid. And as we started looking through their logs and files, realized they had deleted a page in June that was their highest ranking page.
Wow.
And that page effectively, in deleting it, which we found out was just an opinionated, like, I don't like it anymore, I'm just going to delete it. That page was delivering about 30,000 organic visitors a month, which, again, I mean, they're paying to get, they don't have a huge ad budget, but come to find out, that was at least 50% of their conversions monthly. They suddenly had zero visibility. Suddenly, the business was in free fall. And we essentially put a redirect back on that page to point back to the main page. And within 2 weeks, we're back to page 2, down from page 7.
Wow.
So, it was clear the business had been giving the right signals, but with an inexperienced designer and kind of person overseeing the site, and kind of the business owner just saying, well, I don't like this anymore, I'm just going to pull it. They effectively almost destroyed the business. Luckily, we've stabilized the business. We're still now actively trying to dial it in for them. But through that course correction, by the end of December, we had them back to the leads that they needed to be converting the number of patients they need to stay at least break even. So,
Yeah.
you know, that was an instance where they had spent months getting really bad data and were basing all the business decisions on something they were completely unaware of. So that's my small business example. My kind of bigger business example. When I took over as the VP of marketing at ADHD Online, this was in October of 21. So COVID restrictions were still in place. And, the number of people that had been diagnosed with ADHD suddenly, because they were working at home, they were trying to figure out what was going on. In the US was skyrocketing. You had players like Cerebral and others that were spending huge amounts in this space. And ADHD Online was a regional player at the time. We were looking to grow nationally. They did in seed funding, and they were spending about 300,000 a month on advertising, direct to consumer, and the business was growing. But as I got in and started looking at the conversion data, the daily totals that I saw from paid conversions versus what the agency's reporting was showing me was about a 30% difference negative to me. So they were showing 110, conversions, and we were seeing 70, or in an instance like that. And I had to spend weeks with them trying to unprogram what was going on. I was spending. I mean, we were running hundreds of ad sets too. That's the other thing. These guys had built this overly complex campaign. So I was having to go in and kind of hand touch them and look at, where is this thing pointing to? What's happening? Well, as I dove in, they were in a large section of some of the campaigns. They were running the campaigns as pay to call instead of pay to convert. And so we were getting phone calls. We had no way to attribute if they ever converted. Typically, if someone called, they were a patient that needed help, not an inbound new patient. And so the organization had a completely misaligned view of our CAC. I mean, what it was actually costing us to acquire a customer. The agency was saying it was around $90. As I started unwinding it, it was closer to 150. And so again, I mean, that's an erosion of my ad spend, one. Two, the organization has been built off of bad metrics, right? And this has been going on for, I found out, like close to a year, in the biggest phase of their growth, when they kind of hit the hockey stick. So all their projections, all the ways that they were looking ahead, suddenly we had to reevaluate because we weren't producing the way that we thought we were producing, or the organization did. And that's a big, you know, that's a big banner to walk in and tell everyone, like, hey, I'm glad I'm here. But also I just discovered, what you all think is true is not true. And being the bearer of that news is not always fun, honestly, because, you know, the bearer sometimes gets the brunt of the reaction. And all I could say at that time was like, I inherited all of this and I'm working quickly to fix it. And we did. And we were able to turn that into growth. But we had to get rid of the agency. We had to go through months of bad economics. And then it took time to kind of even rebuild trust in the marketing organization's function, that we were sharing good data, that we were accurate in what we were reporting out, and that the ultimate like dollar amounts that we were paying to acquire a new member were accurate. And that certainly wasn't anything I had expected to find just as I'm getting going.
So what, this is going off script a little bit, but you talk about building trust, like when you, and we see this all the time because, people pay a lot of money for marketing services and they
Yeah.
get burned right? It's one of the reasons I like empowering people to understand their marketing, is so that at least they have
Yeah.
some clue. I'm not turning people into experts, but to have an understanding of basic things about marketing, rather than just sort of give it all to someone and say, here, you take it. And
You have to.
you have to understand some basic things in order, if you're not empowered to understand your marketing, then your business is at the mercy of somebody's um, inability or ability, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
won't know until it's too late.
It's true. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, actually, that's a great point, because part of what I found, so I came in, stabilized the organization, we really start growing. Part of what, by growing, we started to expose other major data issues in the business, right? And so, being a mental health company, um, patients were coming on and saying, "Hey, why don't you quit advertising and get back to me on, my the issue I'm trying to contact you about?" seems like you're too busy advertising. And so suddenly, our ticketing system starts to explode. And, we're like, what is going on? Like, we went from 200 tickets in a day to like 1,200 tickets in a day. And, that exposed that we didn't really have the staff or training in place for that kind of triage or that kind of like explosive growth. But it also uncovered that the way that we had been tracking tickets, essentially one patient, every time they made an inquiry, created a new ticket. So in a lot of cases, we really did just have 200 or 300 active tickets, but it looked like we had 1,500 because they were, what's going on? What's going on? You haven't said anything yet. And then they get put into the back of the queue. And so, I mean, again, it's kind of like the reverse side of success where we had our metrics dialed in and working, but then the rest of the organization wasn't ready for what came behind it. And I mean, it was again kind of, it created a near breaking point. It caused a leadership change in that the patient service unit. And it really caused a complete reevaluation of how they were doing service under the new leadership. And luckily, they were able to stabilize it. But again, I mean, had that gone on a few months longer, it could have, ended the business because, it was starting to impact how long patients were staying. We had an assumed lifetime value based on behavior that was suddenly changing. And, I'm still on the hook for hitting my numbers. And when I'm exposing operational issues that I can't control, and yet I still have a goal around it, you become an ambassador very quickly. I mean, to your point, like communicating it, I find like, it's like being a detective. I have to go find out what it's going to trigger everyone and get them, what do they need? What do they want to hear? But I've always got to come with a solution too. I can't just come with a problem. And I think as leaders, we know that. But, when you're coming in and kind of saying, hey, look, I don't think this is on me. And here's why, you kind of feel like you're presenting a case to a jury. So I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but it's kind of like calling into integrity. Like, well, what is, how far do we question it? Because then can I question the financial reporting of how this
Right.
all shakes out? I mean, what are my rights in this like dialogue? Because it is, you're kind of on the hook to be able to explain it, but also help fix it.
That's a lot of food for thought there. It's a bit of a burden, isn't it?
Well,
Right?
and I mean, to me, it's why the average CMO lifespan is what, 18 months, 15 months. It's not long because I think you can come in and be successful with an organization, and the organization is excited to give you the room to succeed. And then as you succeed and the organization surrounds you, you get more drawn into the viewpoint of the organization, which inevitably will question, why aren't you producing the same results as when you got here? Or why isn't it the hockey stick still going up? And it's like, one, plateaus happen, but two, any kind of radical turnaround doesn't mean it's going to go on forever, right? Markets are only so large. And so, that's also why I find like I have to go make friends with the CFO and chief legal, chief compliance people early on because they need to see my face and know that one, I'm accountable for both my spend and the data, but two, that I'm going to hold them accountable. Because if I've got metrics involved and there's an issue, I want to be able to work it out. I don't want to just take blame.
So how does bad data affect a company's ability to make strategic decisions?
Well,
Because you're
so
talking about lots of
yeah,
different kinds of data,
yeah.
right?
Well, so in the case of the mental health company, because that space was growing so rapidly, one of as they're looking to get investors or they're looking to get for future rounds of capital, the first thing everyone looks at is your member metrics and your CAC, right? How much are you actually spending to acquire? And, they were wondering, why is this not, why are we not attracting what we think as people dive in? We think our numbers are solid. And I think people were, as I started to have questions, there's things as an outsider you wouldn't be able to see, but you start having the same questions. Well, why does this number not match this number? They're off enough that they should, if that number is true. And so, to me, it's the type of thing that it can suddenly expose to the rest of the market. Maybe you're not as buttoned up and as solid of as an investment as they want. Luckily, we were able to fix that and turn it around. But to me, it explained a lot of why they had gotten seed A and then around A, and then it was like everybody was like, what's the next step? How are you going to get from this to this? This doesn't match up. And so, but I think the other piece, when looking at the patient support side, the morale impact, because, one, this is a mental health company and all the customer support is virtual, and patients don't have, once you've, and this, I know this even for myself, once you've inquired about your prescription or a result on something, 2 or 3 times and you're not hearing back, you start leaving bad reviews, you start telling others. We had a number of people that had been like years long advocates. We had them in testimonials, we had them in videos, and they were suddenly leaving very publicly, and that impacts your visibility. When your Better Business Bureau rating drops a few letters, from customer complaints, you've got to do a lot to turn that back around. And, that is just the modern consumer. Their expectations for both service and some level of transparency, and not that they need to know everything, but you just need to manage expectations. What should they expect from you? And if you're not doing it, they will take you to task. And again, then future patients are saying, well, I saw in the search results these horrible comments about your business. Should I really trust you? So, it has a snowball effect. And to me, it's just a dangerous, byproduct of almost having too much data now. And so much of it sits within silos. And so if you're not able to kind of join up the organizational view of your data, that's a big hindrance too, because that's kind of where you end up in these little fiefdoms.
So what steps can organizations take to audit their data and their quality, their data for quality and bias?
I think one of the things that I recommended was not just data audits regularly, or, just like you would for polling or sampling, whatever. But asking the outside groups that are your customers. So for marketing, that's sales, that's operations, that's patient support or customer service. Asking them for the mutual metrics that you're going to guide each other on and hold each other accountable to. And some organizations, depending on the size, will want to put that into a committee. I'm more of an advocate for peer-to-peer leader, like coalition. Let's agree we're going to hold each other accountable to these data points. If there are issues or problems, we're gonna work them out here first. And that, if you can do it with one leader in an organization and start to share data, other leaders will want to join in, from my experience, because they don't want to get left in an isolated view of the organization and not be able to defend their castle, right? And so it's kind of a reverse psychology, like, hey, let me pull you onto my side where actually I have some visibility into your data, but you also have visibility into mine. And that partnership is not always welcome, I'll be honest. In large organizations I've been in, some organizations are just kind of built to protect the fiefdoms. But I think that's also, as a fractional, part of the opportunity is to be the person to say, I'm the neutral party. Here's what I know is right. Here's what I know you should be doing. And here's an example of how it could be done. And I think that's the value you can add, is being the one to kind of walk the fire that no one else wants to walk.
Monica has a question. Monica?
Sure.
Sorry, I had some background noise there. So I'm curious, Keith, on your point of view, because quite often you can see there's a lack of good data. And that's business processes. People blame on the data, but it's more business processes to get good data. And it is the lack of how to use the data. There's a difference. Do you see one more prevalent than the other, or kind of both happening?
A great question. I mean, it depends on the org. I would say more often I've seen the application of bad data. I mean, people will do their best to try to dial their data in, but if something kind of gets set as well, this is the way it's done, this is the way this is reported, and there's underlying faults in it, it takes an outsider kind of helping them unwind it to get on board. I've run into things where it was essentially like, well, thanks, but we're not going to change what we're doing. That's too difficult, right? Because you're asking me to kind of undo the world that we've built. And what I prefer to do in kind of place to kind of meet that is to have a prototype report up, with Looker Studio or with some of the other data visualization tools. If you can get access to some core disparate data, you can build a dashboard and show them what it could be, right? And how you would look at it and what you might, pick apart within that data. That takes a willing client, so depending on the work, the field that you're in, it might take NDAs. If you're in healthcare, it might take BAAs just to be able to see that type of data. But it's vital. I mean, you can come in and explain and kind of show the fault, but you've got to show, here's how we would do it if we had access to these things, and here's what we think you would understand, and the difference of those two. In the case of earlier where it was like the CAC was completely wrong, we would have been planning our ad spend completely differently. If I'd known 30% of my spend at Google was just completely wasted. And so, when you're spending that much money a month, that's a lot. So, and Google was the primary source. Go ahead, get another question.
So what steps what roles can fractionals play in addressing the data challenges in their organizations?
One, I think you have to establish that leadership has to own anything that's going to change. Whether that's by mandate, by decree, but you have to have that agreement coming from the top in order for something that's going to upend the way that you're reporting data changes. I apologize, my cat and dog are deciding to make a fun time right at the door. So, in the other piece, I think it's education. I mean, it's partly helping them understand, like, this is the way you used to look at it, but given the data that we have access to now, here's a new view of it that we want you to stress test it. We want you to pick it apart, but we're going to do the same thing over here. And if we find that this really is better and you have more trust in this, we need to move and act on it, because the gap of that, it impacts your schedules, it impacts your budgets. And to me, it's just like, I'm a propane company and all my propane tanks are leaking and I don't know it and I don't even care, it seems. And if you're that profitable that it's not noticeable, that to me is also an issue, because it's suggestive that you've got huge layers of inefficiency, but that data gap is also kind of hiding.
Okay. So in what ways does bias data influence internal and external operations, or internal operations and customer service?
So, part of that comes down to, again, if I think suddenly I've got, 5x the problem that I actually have because the stats show it and I'm actively trying to work through it, it can affect your reputation. If it's a thing where you're calculating, sales percentage wrong, or a profitability on a line of business, you might miss an earnings target. You might miss your numbers overall, or you might have to come back later and say, oh yeah, we reported this last quarter, but that's not right. We actually uncovered a data issue and it's significantly off. I mean, that turns into a whole other, bigger reputation hit. So I think that, it's helping the organization understand what their bias is. Sometimes it's bad data. Sometimes it's the way they were collecting data. People often jump to what's gender or racial, and it could be, depends on what industry you're in. But again, we know that the healthcare reporting data around pain, so much of it is centered around reporting from men, and the reporting from women is vastly underserved. So all the pain recommendations are based off of a self-admitted group of not as tough as women population. So I just say that because to me it's like, that's the type of thing where, again, you've got a pharmaceutical industry that is, suffering because of that, in my estimation. Got a healthcare industry that, has a misunderstanding of pain because it's not layered or as deep as it could be. And that's just one instance. So yeah, I think about this stuff too often.
You miss a lot of opportunities, yeah?
You do, yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Keith? You're a quiet lot. Oh my God.
I'll ask
Okay,
one.
go ahead, Amanda.
So for smaller companies that you're working with, especially those that have bad data, they're probably not so focused on things like GDR compliance or some of those other like heavier, weightier issues. How do you get them focused on things like that when you're just trying to get the data in order? Because I often work, people are using all of the scraping tools and kind of scrambling for cold outreach. How do you ensure that people are staying compliant?
So great question. And interestingly enough, like around this time last year, I became obsessed with this because, I'd been involved in writing social media policies in a lot of my roles, like digital marketing, kind of what can you do, what can't you do. And as all of the AI tools were, kind of rapidly progressing, and I saw peers starting to use them within their orgs, and they'd ask me questions like, "Do you think they know I'm using ChatGPT at work?" I'm like, "Well, the network admin does, but if you should probably tell someone, unless you just." But so I ended up creating for myself, a solopreneur, my first, besides my privacy policy, I have a guidelines for responsible business and AI. And I essentially took on the onus of saying, I have a responsibility to not only, because GDPR, the California, the AI Act, there are disclosures that are going to be expected. But not only that, like I've just been an advocate for my whole career. If we're tracking someone with cookies, it's way easier to explain them the value than for it to come back later and it's, why are you going through my garbage surreptitiously? Well, I'm not. I'm actually trying to enrich your experience, but I never told you that. So you think I'm snooping through your garbage, right? And that really is to me on the industry. And so, I it's kind of an active discussion that I bring forward to my clients to say, where are you with guiding your resources, your leadership, and your vendors? Because how much of this are your vendors, right? I mean, in the last year alone, almost everyone that's using software as a service across anything has had a major addition of AI functions to their tools that they're using, terms of service that changed likely because of the addition of those AI tools. And most of them are unaware that that might have changed and that things that they're using might be going into training data, that the way that they've been working, was collecting like Slack. Suddenly, oh, we all find out we were in Slack's training data, right? And none of us agreed to that, but in agreeing to use the platform, we did. So it is a minefield, but I think with small businesses, there's an opportunity for you to build trust. If you can show the customer you're doing the best you can to, they will give you a lot of grace. It's really when it kind of comes back later and it's like, well, why were you doing all this? Because I just find, everyone, if you survey them and show them, here's the rich web when we know about you, and here's the web when we know nothing about you, they will always prefer what we know about you because then they get things that are relevant to them. And it's not always perfect. And I think advertisers have a huge responsibility to be better about the audiences that they buy. But I think consumer behavior is starting to show us, especially as we come back from COVID, people want to trust the businesses they work with. Facebook's going to change the terms of service and go from fact checking to not fact checking. Maybe I'm going to use another platform because my loyalty is not as taut as it was before, especially when you break that trust just by quickly showing like you're not really looking out for my interest.
Yeah. John, have you got a question?
Hi, Keith.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? When we talked last week or so, you described yourself as a creative. I'm quoting this now. You described yourself as a creative who uses AI tools to visualize his ideas and believes that AI will not kill the creative industry. How do you see you incorporating what you've been talking about with data into talking to someone about AI image generation implementation?
It's a great question. So you've probably seen, and it seems like now a lot of the image generation tools, I know like within Free Pick and Midjourney and several of the others, you now have the ability to train your own small model, right? So you can create a model that essentially sits in front of an engine like Flux, which is a great image generator. And by giving it a small image set, you can start to create brand photography that's AI generated, right? I mean, I've seen examples where if you've got a product shot and you can get people wearing it, you've got your traditional, like, in a light box photos of it from a couple of angles, and you've got men and women potentially wearing it. It only takes 15 to 20 images. And once you train that model, you can start to produce things that look just like what you've trained it on. And it's not perfect. I mean, I've done trainings for myself, just using photography of myself to see what it comes up with. But there are a lot that look like my brother. There are a lot that look like my uncle, and there are a lot that look like me. And so it's it's partly like helping organizations understand, like, you still have control over your data and what you want. So like if you've got all these creative assets, but you're looking for maybe how to use these tools moving ahead, training a small model to see what you can get is certainly an option. I mean, if you're going to, if you're going to print and you're doing something for a catalog, I'm always going to say you probably need to get the highest quality photography that you can, so you've got the best image you can get, and you can upscale things. But if you're looking for something for social or LinkedIn or something quick that fits the brand but is not going to have a long lifetime, these models are incredible for what they, I think, allow an internal team to start to do, and for a brand to kind of take on some of their own creative within certain boundaries. And I mean, the thing that's going to come out of that, though, is every organization that I've talked to of some size is still going to want some controls. They're not, it's not just like we've talked about, like where you just generate 15 and then, okay, I've got a bank and I can move on. They're going to want to select the 5 out of the bank that they're like, yep, that's brand approved. Well, fine, you've got 15 to pick from before you didn't. So it's just, there's going to be a big educational component there. But, I believe if you show, because everybody today, they're trying to be nimble, they're trying to be as fast as their agency. And if they're only using the models or these tools kind of infrequently, they're not really going to understand what they could be doing. And so I think that's the place to say, like, okay, if you've got 15 to 20 product images, which you probably do, we could do something like this and then show them. Because I think, that's the part where once they can see it themselves, the other doors start unlocking. Oh, I could do, my stock images this way or whatever. And again, I'm not a huge fan still of the human generated, because they're getting good enough now that it is hard to distinguish. But if you're doing that, I feel like you have to be telling people these are not human models. These are AI generated for marketing purposes. And because otherwise, there's too much risk of losing all of your integrity, because you're just not willing to talk about what you're actually doing. And that is where some of the GDPR and the California Act they're gonna have teeth that you're gonna have to. So yeah, I hope that helps answer the question.
That very, very, very succinct. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Are we all good? Anything else you'd like to add, Keith, before we wrap
No,
up?
I just thanks for the questions and for the invitation, Renee. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to staying connected with everybody on
Thank you so
FRN.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Give me a
much.
little plug there at the end.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, everybody who is a member of the Fractional Referral Network can be featured on a weekly call just like this one. So all you have to do is join the network if you're not already a member and reach out to me, and voila, here you'll be. All right, wonderful, everybody.
Really
Thank you
appreciate it,
so
Renee.
much. I'm going to
Yep.
end our call now. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.